In Formula One, the driver in the fastest car doesn't always win. There are millions of things that can and do go wrong, so it's all about being in the right place at the right time. From taking advantage of rule changes to stealing a victory on the final lap, stay tuned as we dive into the biggest upsets in modern F1 history and have a look at where they are now. First up, 2008 Italian Grand Prix. Most Red Bull drivers are put through to the test at the junior team first. Max Verstappen, Daniel Ricciardo, Mark Webber, and others all started at Toro Rosso first, and they all did well enough to earn a promotion. But in 2008, Sebastian Vettel raced the wheels off his Toro Rosso to make history for the team. It was Vettel's first full season in Formula One, and the young German was ready to make his mark. The season didn't get off to a great start with 4 retirements in a row, but picked up when he finished P5 in Monaco. But it was 8 rounds later, at the iconic Monza circuit, where Vettel would leave no doubt about who held the future of the Red Bull team. In wet and tricky conditions, Vettel showed his speed by snatching pole position off Heikki Kovalainen and his future teammate Mark Webber. More rain during the race allowed Vettel to build up a solid lead over his rivals and cross the finish line 12 seconds ahead of Kovalainen. It was one of the most impressive breakout performances of a young driver's career. While Vettel won the race, his teammate Sebastian Bourdais ended down in P18, which mirrored where Seb finished 8th and Bourdais finished 18th. After that season, Red Bull promoted him, and the rest is history. He won 4 back-to-back world championships and proved himself as one of the greatest drivers of his generation. This year, he announced his retirement from racing. We'll miss you, Seb. Next, 2021 Hungary Grand Prix. Last season was a battle between 2 exceptional drivers. Between Hamilton and Verstappen, they won 18 out of 22 races. One of the biggest upsets of those 4 races was in Hungary, where Esteban Ocon came from P8 to claim his first Grand Prix win. The first lap of the race is often the most dangerous, and the 2021 Hungarian Grand Prix proved that beyond doubt. After less than half a minute of racing, Valtteri Bottas, Sergio Perez, Charles Leclerc, and Lance Stroll were already out of the race. As the lights went out for the start, Norris pulled a move on Bottas and made his way in front, but the Mercedes man slammed into the back of him. Meanwhile, 3 other cars collided as well. Crofty could barely keep up with all the incidents. A couple of laps later, both Lando Norris and Nikita Mazepin retired too. Unsurprisingly, the race was red flagged, and the race restarted. Hamilton was the only one who elected not to change tires, but ended up pitting a lap later, which put Ocon into the lead. One of the highlights of the race was Ocon's teammate, Fernando Alonso, holding off Hamilton for a mighty 12 laps to slow down the 7-time world champion. When Hamilton finally got past Alonso, he made light work of Carlos Sainz, but still couldn't close the gap to Vettel or Ocon up ahead. Now, Ocon is set to become the lead driver at Alpine after Alonso announced his departure. Say goodbye to the best wingman, Esteban. And now, Brawn 2009. 2009 was much like this year in the world of Formula One. There were a host of regulation changes that were designed to upset the pecking order, and that they did. McLaren, Renault, and Ferrari had been fighting over championships for the past few years, but in 2009, a fresh face emerged. It was the inaugural year of the Green Machines of Brawn GP, a team set up by former Ferrari engineer Ross Brawn. Brawn GP were able to capitalize on the new regulations, most effectively with a controversial double diffuser at the rear of the car. It used the crash structure at the back of the car to create more downforce. Starting at pre-season testing, rival teams launched a protest and wanted the FIA to intervene, and it took them 2 races to conclude that the diffusers were legal. By that time, Jenson Button had already won both of the opening races and went on to win 4 of the next 5 races too. By the British Grand Prix, Red Bull and McLaren were starting to catch up, but it was too late. Button's results slipped, and he only scored 2 podiums in the final 10 races. But his flawless performance at the beginning of the year carried him over the line to win his first world championship. Button and Brawn were unlikely champions who overcame powerhouses by adapting to regulation changes. These days, Ross Brawn is the one creating the regulations, and Jenson Button sometimes fills in as a commentator. How times have changed. Up next, how did one of Formula One's worst drivers end up winning a race? And which season finale was just as nerve-wracking as last year's? So don't go anywhere. Next, 2012 Spanish Grand Prix. Venezuelan driver Pastor Maldonado's name lived on in Formula One for all of the wrong reasons. He is mainly remembered for his tendency to crash. In his second season with Williams in 2012, he showed a flash of that talent at the Spanish Grand Prix. He had only scored 4 points in the season coming into the race, but by the end of the weekend, he would more than quadruple that. Maldonado qualified in P2 behind Lewis Hamilton, but the McLaren driver was sent to the back of the grid after breaching refueling regulations. That promoted Maldonado to his first and only pole position. Fernando Alonso battled Maldonado and wrestled the lead from him at the start of the race, but after their second pit stop, Ferrari dropped behind Williams and Maldonado emerged in P2. He still had Raikkonen up ahead, but with the help of DRS, he flew past the Lotus and for the first time led the race. Maldonado was celebrated as a hero in his home country as he became the first Venezuelan to win a Grand Prix. And on the podium, even Alonso and Raikkonen lifted him up on their shoulders. So where is Pastor Maldonado now? After Formula One, he transitioned to endurance racing and competed in the 24 Hours of Le Mans with no success. Now he enjoys a life of retirement with his wife and 2 daughters. He is also a big believer in cryptocurrency and NFTs. Let's hope he hasn't lost all his F1 earnings already. And now, 2008 Brazilian Grand Prix. Before last year's Abu Dhabi drama, 2008 was probably the tightest a championship race had been in recent history. The fight was between McLaren's Lewis Hamilton and Ferrari's Felipe Massa. Hamilton had been freed from his teammate rivalry when Alonso moved to Renault, and he was now the #1 driver. And after a strong start to the season, Massa's teammate Kimi Raikkonen had dropped out of contention. Going into the final race, Massa was 7 points behind Hamilton, but qualifying went perfectly. Massa secured pole position, and throughout the race, he barely put a foot wrong, keeping the lead and even setting the fastest lap. Given Massa's position, the commentators were busy doing the mathematics for where Hamilton needed to finish to win the championship. That turned out to be P5. Late in the race, there was a considerable amount of rainfall that made navigating the track difficult. Hamilton was stuck in P4, behind Timo Glock, and with only a few corners to go, Felipe Massa's team inside the Ferrari garage were already celebrating. But then, on the very last corner of the very last lap, Glock stumbled, and Hamilton swiftly overtook him. He crossed the line to become the youngest world champion at the time. The news took a bit of time to travel to Ferrari, who were stunned in disbelief. It was a miracle race for Hamilton and an unforgettable maiden victory. But you can't help feeling bad for Massa. He did absolutely everything right and still didn't end up empty-handed. That's F1, and now 2020 Italian Grand Prix. There's something about Italy that brings out the underdogs. Toro Rosso won their only race with Vettel there in 2008, and 12 years later, after the team rebranded as AlphaTauri, they won their second Grand Prix. At the 2020 Italian Grand Prix, one of the riskiest bets you could have taken would have been Pierre Gasly. He was starting from 10th place on the grid and would have to get through Racing Point, Red Bull, McLaren, and a dominant Mercedes team to have any chance. But every once in a while, the stars align. Hamilton started strong, but his teammate Bottas suffered issues that dropped him down to P6 early in the race. Then, Sebastian Vettel's rear brakes caught fire and caused him to retire. Gasly pitted just before the pit window window closed. And when it was reopened, the rest of the field followed suit. That left Gasly in third place, behind Lance Stroll and Lewis Hamilton. From there, Gasly took advantage of a mistake by Stroll, and then Hamilton was ordered to serve a stop-and-go penalty. Gasly did just enough to hold off the charging McLaren of Carlos Sainz to win the race by less than half a second. It was his first Grand Prix victory, and since then he has tried to climb his way back to Red Bull without success. There were rumors that he could be heading to Alpine, but Helmut Marko shut them down and said that Gasly was under a tight contract. Fair enough, he's a fantastic driver. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you again in the next one.